Welcome back to another episode of Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. And this is wrapping up our series on emotions. And what way to wrap it up is to talk about people that hold back their emotions. The title is The Seductive Power of Emotionally Unavailable People. And I wish I heard this episode when I was single, because that was my life. Always being seduced by that person you can't have, that doesn't want to get close. And why does that happen? And why does that keep happening to a lot of people?
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting topic. I mean, all these topics we've been talking about in the series about emotions have been incredibly interesting for us. Jung himself says, without emotion, there is no transformation. Mm-hmm. So it's a pivotal part of human development. If we cannot access our emotions, we're not able to express them, to work with them, we're stuck.
You know, I think for me, doing personal development for so many years, I really didn't see a change until I got to the root emotion that I was working with. Mm. And we all try to read books and, think logically and look back and kind of connect the dots and think, well, if I can figure it out rationally, I can make a different choice. But everything we do, every decision we make has an emotional component, and that emotion is usually unconscious. And so let's talk about unavailable people, people that are unavailable. I'm talking about someone who wants to get close to someone, whether it's a parent, whether it's a lover, a friendship that you just feel like you can't really get to them, you can't reach them, they're kind of shut down. And so why does that happen? And so how would you describe emotionally unavailable?
So it is essentially someone who is very dependent on their logical brain, right? Their left hemisphere, in a sense, the reasoning, the logic, the kind of linear type of thinking, and they have little access to their emotional life, to the imagination, to their body, to the creative part often, because in order to be creative, you need to access the emotions. And
is that because they just think their problems can be solved in a practical, logical way, and they think emotions don't really play a role, like in what they do in their life?
Part of it, but if you notice in our culture, we're very biased towards cognition. What do they teach you in school, from elementary school all the way up to high school? Memorize, learn, read, think, all based on cognitive processing. No one teaches us about emotions, how to deal with them, what are they. And I'm not talking about just men. Women have a lot of difficulties accessing their emotions and expressing their emotions in a creative way.
Well, we've all been children being emotionally clumsy, we should say. And we've been shamed for the emotions we have, like crying in front of our friends, or, a parent not saying, I'll give you something to cry about, like you don't show your emotions and act a certain way when, you're in public, don't act, act out in front of others. And so then we tend to kind of want to keep that persona of, I got it all together, everything's fine. And I find for professional women, a lot of times, because they're working in a man's world, is that we have to kind of be like men. We have to be stoic, and we can't be too emotional, because God forbid we make an emotional decision and not get the boardroom to be happy with us. So we have to sort of hide everything. And so do you think most people are emotionally unavailable?
To some extent, I would say so. Again, because the culture in generally is emotionally stunted. People are not really able to express the full richness of their emotions, and I mean in a creative, positive way, not necessarily just screaming or acting out aggressively, but being able to express their joy, their happiness, their just the joy of living.
And do you think it's also the kind of feeling that it's easy to express anger, or the anger is easy to get out because it almost like takes over? But for the most part, it's just that numbing of life and trying to stay, like keeping your head above water, basically.
Yeah, it works at a lot of levels, because biologically our neocortex, the new part of our brain that has evolved just recently in the last 200,000 years, maybe, most of it is operating in dampening our emotions, like keeping things under check.
So our wild side, or
right.
our animalistic passion.
Yeah, it tries to keep everything under control, under wraps, kind of internally, and not show our emotional life to others.
Now, when it comes to relationships, I have a question for you. Because of just the way society has changed, when our parents were getting married and mating, and our grandparents, people really didn't, they weren't thinking about, I'm in love and this emotional. It was more like a contract and more of a practical decision. And there wasn't this expectation that the man should be so romantic all the time. And maybe a little bit, but not to the extent it is now. It's this over expectation of what love is and how it should look all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's changed a lot. The sitcoms and the
rom-coms,
the romantic comedies have influenced the culture a lot. To think that love relationships or romantic relationships should always be this lovey-dovey kind of very romantic expression, and that's the only way it should look. But it's really a phase of love that's important. Of course, it's the courting and the bonding that happens. But then it's supposed to move on into more mature kinds of relationships that it's an evolution, right? It's a kind of taking responsibility, becoming part of the community, where the couple now takes on bigger roles in the community, not only between themselves, but part of the family and part of that larger society.
In a way, I think that maybe it is a good thing that these rom-coms came about, because our parents and our parents' parents, they just basically settled. And I mean, my parents had a good relationship, but I didn't really see it behind the scenes, but they were very close and open and intimate. But you hear a lot of people that have been married forever. I mean, people that have told me they 80 years old, they're thinking, God, I spent my whole life with this man and I never really loved him, or I never got close to him, and the expectation was lower. And now that the expectation's higher, I think there's more of this, my partner's unavailable, almost as if we're pulling the veil off and saying, wow, look what's really happening here. We aren't really connecting the way we are because of this evolution of dampening that passion and evolving into this like stoic human being that's holding it all together. And we've almost lost that part of it. So maybe art is telling us, go and run after the airport and go and feel all that love and that passion. And because it is missing a lot in relationships. So when we talk about emotionally unavailability, there's a certain way people are. And I know Jung talked about the Puer Aeternus and the Puella Aeterna. And so let's talk about that a little bit.
So the Puer Aeternus simply means forever boy, or the eternal boy. This is the boy or the man who refuses to grow up. And the
Peter
Puella,
Pan syndrome, right? They called it.
Yeah, in popular culture, popular psych, they call it the Peter Pan syndrome. I think there was a famous book back in the 80s. The Puella is the counterpart, the girl, the eternal girl, who also refuses to grow up. But of course, they trigger each other. A Puer will not necessarily be attracted to a Puella because they kind of project on each other. But
or
anyway,
they're together for a short amount of time, but they can never really. They kind of have that passionate off and on, but they can't really stay together because they're both non-committal.
Yeah. Von Franz actually predicted, Von Franz was a student of Jung's, she predicted that in our culture there was going to be a massive amount of people with this kind of syndrome because of the culture, basically, of worshiping youth, worshiping this kind of romantic phase of relationships without really going into the deeper, more responsible parts of it, without emphasizing the difficulties of really establishing a good relationship, and also without establishing that you need to be emotionally mature in order to be a good partner in a romantic relationship. And sure enough, I think we've seen it, or we're seeing it now, that a lot of people don't know how to commit to a relationship because of that emotional unavailability, either in their partner or in themselves.
And I think the biggest misconception about emotional unavailability is that people think that it means that you don't feel anything inside. I see emotional unavailability means that you feel a lot of things, but you aren't able to share it with another human being. So it's more about sharing that inner experience with another person. And that's what love should be. But I know for me, I always thought I was available. I was out there looking for love and falling in love with the eternal boy every 5 minutes. And what I realized is that it was my own projection. It was the projection of my shadow, which was this persona that wanted a commitment, but the shadow was terrified of commitment and opening up and all those things. And when I realized that, something clicked in my brain, and I said, oh, wait, I'm the one who's unavailable. And so, but I didn't see that because I felt so much emotion. And a lot of my clients I talk to, they feel so much emotion. They cry when someone breaks up with them. They are excited when some new person comes along, but they don't see, they say, he's the one who's not available. He's the one who ghosted me. He's the one who left, who didn't want the commitment. And here I am with my heart open. But then if you really look at it, there's still little bit of guardedness in us to not share that experience. It's like a shared emotional experience.
Right. So talking about the shadow, let me ask you a question then.
Okay.
When you see people that complain that their partners are emotionally unavailable, how do you work with them?
Well, I first gently tell them, well, maybe there's a part of you that is pointing to a part of you, and gently, because immediately, I know if someone told me that, I'd say, no, you're crazy.
Defense.
But then they come around eventually. It takes a couple of times. They come around, you know what? I think I'm the one who's emotionally unavailable. I'm the one who's holding back. And you can tell this by how you feel when you're around someone who's really pursuing you. So emotionally unavailable people love, like you said, the seductive power. We're seduced by them, but we never, ever want to be really fully in it. So we fall in love with this idea of this person. In our minds, we create this like beautiful image and they project it onto this person. And we create this whole relationship in our mind and we sing those romantic songs. And then when we're with them, we don't share that part of us. We feel like they're not reaching us, but we're also holding back. And so I say, when you're around someone who's totally available, I know for me, I would run. And I see my clients do that too. Like, he's so nice to me. There's something wrong. I got to go.
If they're texting you 4 times a day, it's too much.
I really like this guy, but he keeps texting me all the time. I'm like, well, if you want a relationship, isn't that what you want? And then the ones that are that kind of unavailable, it's like, why isn't he calling? So you could really tell how you respond to someone who's pursuing you and the fear that comes up. That people talk about claustrophobia. I feel claustrophobic. He wants to see me every night this weekend. And it's like, well, isn't that a good thing? And so we just get into that fear. And I was there too. So no judgment here, but we just don't even realize what we're doing to ourselves. And then we think, well, it's just not the chemistry with that person. They're not the one for me. I want to feel that chemistry, but we only feel that chemistry with the unavailable person.
Yeah.
It's because there's a part of us that is like that, and it kind of feels comfortable in that, like someone else playing out that playful role.
Right. And ultimately, it is a defense mechanism, right? That we protect ourselves because most of us have been hurt in the past. We've had our heart broken by those early romantic relationships. And our mind just says, don't let this ever happen again, right? Protect yourself. And so that defensive strategy is always operating, and people then don't know how to open that part up. But it's like Rumi says, the broken heart is meant to crack you open so that the real you is able to emerge from that. And
so it's that willingness to go toward that.
Yes, that willingness.
Risk.
It is a risk, right? Because no one can guarantee you that going into a relationship, you're not going to get your heart broken. It's almost part of the deal, right? Because even if you stay with that person, you're risking losing them somehow. And
they can get sick, they could die, and then you're still mourning them when they're gone. So getting close to someone is hard.
It's scary.
Now, I want to ask you, so we learn this usually from a parent to be ourselves unavailable. So what about the emotionally unavailable parent? How would someone, so let's say you're the daughter or son and you really want to get close to your mom or dad now, and you're just kind of getting older and you're just like, I feel like I can't reach them. What would you say? How would you, because they're really showing you yourself in a way, because you had to learn it usually from your parents.
Well, it has to do with identification and rejection. So the child either identifies with the parent and says, I'm going to do the same, right? I'm going to adopt that strategy of being closed, emotionally closed and protected. And the opposite side of the coin is that somebody will say, I don't want to be like that. I want to be the opposite. I'm going to be very open and really express my emotions and create good, loving relationships. But either way, the part of the parent that you reject goes into your shadow, into your unconscious mind. And so what ends up happening is you end up attracting that part that you rejected in a partner.
So you can't, just because you reject it, we think we get away with it. We say, I don't want that. And then we think, oh, I guess that's what I keep seeing, the things that I don't want.
That's right. So Jung says, whatever you push away into the shadow, you end up running into it as soon as you walk out the door, right? And in relationships especially, you're going to create a kind of relationship that's going to put you exactly in the situation that you're running away from. So instead of seeing it as a curse, we encourage people to see it as an opportunity. Here is my chance to rework my childhood in
and
a
have a
conscious
happy
way.
childhood as an adult.
That's right.
Well, part of the work that we do in Jungian coaching is not to get rid of things or to make the negative parts of us positive or the unavailable parts available, just kind of flip them to, swap it. But really, truly, it's to understand and accept that part of ourselves. Is that it's not that the unavailable part is right or wrong, but just the lack of, not to judge it, and then also have compassion for ourselves, because as kids, we don't make a decision we want to be unavailable. We are adapted to that pattern for survival. And so Jung also said that the most terrifying thing for a person is to accept oneself completely. And so we have to first accept ourselves and accept that part of ourselves that may be a little hesitant to open up, maybe a little hesitant to share how we feel. And if we can accept that part of ourselves and really get to know that part, like that shadow part, and say, wow, tell me more. I guarantee you, when you're in a relationship with someone who feels emotionally unavailable, it's like from the inside how you'd want to be spoken to and how you would want to be approached. And then you'll be able to basically have more of an affinity with that person and understand where they're coming from and be like, I know it's hard for us to open up. And it'd be easier to have that conversation, but you have to examine your own unavailability first so that you can have those experiences with another person.
So this is going to be highly unpopular because if you if you've seen this pattern in your life, right, that you keep attracting unavailable partners or emotionally unavailable partners, the answer is not in changing your dating patterns or moving to another town.
Or what about a new app? You know, they have apps that are only for available people.
It's about looking inside yourself. In other words, the pattern has persisted because of your own unconscious pattern. The external is simply reflecting that unconscious mind in you.
I have this little diagram I used to draw at my little dating events I did back in the day when I had my book come out. And it's like two bubbles. And I said, there's two people and they're in their little comfort bubble. And then when you're pursuing someone and the person's moving away, you're still in your bubble. And if they're pursuing you and you're moving away, you're still in your bubble. The most terrifying thing is for us to actually integrate and be together. And so when we think we're pursuing someone, we're open, but we're really staying in our bubble still. Like there's no fear of them coming in. And it's when someone comes towards you, if you don't move away and you stay and you allow that person to get close to you, that's what makes you available. And it's terrifying for some people because maybe at a time in their life, a very important person like a parent or a loved one has let them down. They opened their heart and it got crushed. So it's a natural, normal human response to protect yourself. So it's not a wound. It's more of a sign of a healthy mind. It's a part of you that said, hey, let me protect you. So if we can look at that, and not in the event of the parent, but look at that protective mechanism and kind of examine it a little bit, we can understand why we did it, and then we could dismantle those defenses. Because now we could really understand no one can ever harm us in any way.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with understanding that your parents, of course, those experiences stayed with you. We're not denying that. But they didn't really do those things to mess you up, or those things didn't really damage you permanently. They're simply there to teach you how to drop that resentment against others. That everyone is acting out of their own past conditioning. They're doing the best that they can with their own genetics and epigenetics, and that's it, right? It's when you understand that principle, you're able to really drop any resentment towards your parents, grandparents, things that happened in the past, and move on. And that moving on is really what Jung is talking about.
In individuation.
Yes, that you're able then to enter a relationship not with all that emotional conditioning baggage from the past, but you're able to enter and really be present with somebody in a relationship in a new way.
Because most of the time what we're doing, if we're not conscious of our own patterns and ourselves and our shadow, is that we're projecting old expectations onto that partner that aren't necessarily about them. And I see it as, like I've heard it said, as like looking at people with hard eyes. You know, those hardened eyes that, you're going to hurt me, I know it, I should be careful, versus fresh eyes, where it's this like openness, this let me see who this person is before I, bring all my armor to the date. I could just kind of just be present with that person and just see who they are. And I think we'll be more relaxed when we're together. And when you open up, the other person feels comfortable opening up. But if two people are guarded, it's like a game of what's that called? Where they go toward each other. It's like, who's going to back out first? No one wants to make that first move.
Absolutely. I would say, though, that it is more than just expressing your emotions, right? It is looking at yourself in that non-judging way, but doing that self-inquiry, really going inward and asking, let's say those early experiences with the parents and the attachment patterns and all that, what message did I come out of that experiencing? What were the subtle undertones of all that? If you haven't examined all that, then they're going to play out in your current relationships. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong. That's simply the way the mind works. It expresses its past experiences.
So if you want to see your patterns that you're not aware of, just look at your history of relationships and you'll see why they're there. And then if it's a parent that you're trying to get close with and resent because they weren't open with you, they influenced you in some way. You have to really look at within yourself and say, well, how do I deal with that? And some people deal with this with bosses. The boss is shut down and they're trying to bond, or colleagues at work. This happens in all relationships. But I think that also human beings, we're kind of messy beings. We're messy, we're defensive, we're just trying to survive, and we're imperfect in a lot of ways, the human part of ourself. And we're just trying to get through the day, keep our persona intact. And a lot of times we really sometimes inadvertently trip over other people, say the wrong thing. And so if we can be okay with our own foibles and missteps and things that aren't not the best about ourselves that we need to improve on, and just be more compassionate toward ourselves, that invites someone in. That will help you invite someone in to get close. But if you're trying to keep up this perfect persona, you're never going to get anyone close, because on the inside, like, this is a mess in here and I better keep people out. It's like I would say, if you think of a house, the guard dog is your ego, and this new relationship is coming in, and the dog doesn't know the difference between the mailman and a robber. So the dog is going to react the same way to the same whatever person comes up. So you're not even seeing that person. You're seeing it through that defensiveness, that guard dog. Don't break my heart. And that leads to emotional unavailability. And really, I love what you said, is just get your heart broken. It's not going to break you. It feels like it in the moment, but it's not going to break you as much as the payoff that happens is when you can really fall in love and really get close to another human being and become emotionally available.
Yeah, absolutely. The good news is this, and I really learned it the hard way, because I was completely shut down emotionally for a long time. But Jung's work says you can change. It doesn't matter what your patterns have been if you're willing to do the internal work, the inner work. There is an opportunity to change those patterns.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not a life sentence. And so those of you who are, experiencing those patterns, ask yourself why. Ask yourself, how do I hold myself back? And then really look at your own emotional state. How much do I share of myself with others? And I bet you'll be surprised when you really ask that question. So this is our last episode of the year of 2021.
Wow.
Can you believe it? We thought 2021 would never end, but it's actually ending. We're taking a quick break over the holidays, but we'll be back in January for Soul Sessions again. And what is the topic for the next series, Rob, for 2022?
Yeah, I've been wanting to do something on mythology for a while, and we were talking about this, is the power of myths and archetypes to live by. In other words, what do these myths that have persisted throughout the ages, what do they lend to us? What do they teach us? Why are they so important? As Joseph Campbell says, the myths are like our humanity's dreams. There are visions, our aspirations in these ancient stories that have come down throughout the ages for us.
And they have so much symbolic meaning in our lives and telling us where we are in the process. And the myths influence Hollywood and television and movies and superhero movies. And also, I think that in our dreams, the myths, a lot of times when we work with clients, I'll see someone who has never heard the myth before, but the myth will play out in a dream and it'll be so symbolic. And you'll say, oh, that reminds me of this myth of Osiris. And it's just so interesting how on a deep level, on a collective level, we have so much knowledge about these myths and these patterns and archetypes. And so we're going to talk about that in the next series. I'm very excited about that. And then really how to apply it in a practical way.
Yes.
Versus just being like, oh, that's interesting. How do we make it? What do we do with it in our life?
Exactly. How do we
Live
apply them, live into them, and live by them?
So thank you, everyone, for joining us this year. We hope you have a happy holiday season and a happy, happy New Year. We hope you all stay safe and sound and spend time with people you love. And if you're around the holiday tree or whatever holiday you celebrate and you're with people you love and you feel everyone's kind of holding back, I invite you to just take that risk. Just tell someone how you appreciate them. Tell someone something different than you normally would say. Be willing to stretch yourself, because I promise you, every time I've done this in my life with my family, if I reached out like my dad and I just went out on a limb and I'm going to be like, do something opposite, it just came back in such great reward, because everyone is really craving that connection. And all of us are so afraid to make that step. So you, as the empowered person that you are, make that step in your holiday adventures this year.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next year.
Yes. Take care, everyone. Have a happy holiday.